Okay, so I'm here to do a read aloud of two books. So the first one is Bailey Goes Camping, and this is a book that is by Kevin Henkes, and it reminds me of us having to stay home and be in isolation, and how sometimes we have to use our imagination to do some of the things we would normally like to do outside. And the second book I'm going to read is called The Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And it's a book I really like. I like the pictures, very simple but nice pictures, and kind of reminds me of some of the history of Canada and how the RCMP first came. So I'm going to start with Bailey Goes Camping. Just pull this in a little bit so that you guys can see the pictures better. Okay. Bruce and Betty were bunny scouts. They were going camping. Bailey had to stay home. I want to go camping, said Bailey. You're too little to go, said Bruce. But in a few years you can, said Betty. So I guess if you're the youngest sibling in a family, you might understand that sometimes the older siblings get to go do things before you do. Don't feel bad, Bailey, said Bruce. It's not that great. All we do is eat hot dogs and live in a tent and go swimming and fishing and hunt for bears and tell ghost stories and fall asleep under the stars. And don't forget roasting marshmallows, said Betty. That's best of all. Does sound pretty fun, doesn't it? Bailey watched Bruce and Betty leave. It's not fair, he said. Come on, said Papa. Let's play baseball. No, said Bailey. Want to help me bake cookies? Said Mama. No, said Bailey. We could read a book, said Papa. No, said Bailey. I want to go camping. You're too little to go, said Papa, but in a few years you can, said Mama. Don't feel bad, Bailey, said Papa. It's not that great. Oh, yes, it is, said Bailey. You get to eat hot dogs and live in a tent and go swimming and fishing and hunt for bears and tell ghost stories and fall asleep under the stars. And best of all, you roast marshmallows. You know, said Mama, you can do all those things right here. I can, said Bailey. He can, said Papa. Yes, said Mama, smiling. That afternoon, Bailey ate hot dogs and lived in a tent. He went swimming in the bathtub and fishing, also in the bathtub. That night, Bailey went on a bear hunt and told ghost stories. And what was the last thing? And best of all, he roasted marshmallows. Before falling asleep under the stars. So he got to do all those same exact things, but in his house. So sometimes you do have to get creative. So Great book by Kevin Henkes. Okay, so the next book I wanted to read, The Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Well, it looks like this book needs a little bit of repair on the spine, by Mark Tetreault. Okay, so we also call the Royal Canadian Mounted Police RCMP for short, and they're sort of like police officers, but for rural areas, so not in the city, like the city of Edmonton, but they would be for some of the smaller communities and rural areas across Canada. Okay, beautiful pictures. I absolutely love this book. More than 100 years ago, on the vast Canadian prairie, lived the country's first people. They lived in teepees, houses they could quickly pack up when they wanted to follow the herds of bison. At that time, John A. Macdonald, Canada's first Prime Minister, dreamed of uniting the country's west with the east. He decided to build a railway. To help him accomplish this, and to look after the people who would work on it, a group of capable men was put together. They were called the Mounted Police. Among the recruits, there were teachers and farmers, students, and lumberjacks. The proud new Mounties were eager for adventure as they set out from Manitoba for their long journey west. The land was beautiful, and it seemed to go on forever. But it was also cruel. The sun burned down, the sky was filled with black flies. ... More to come. And the animals were exhausted. Finally, after 2 long months, the cavalcade reached the land of the Blackfoot. The Mounties immediately went to work building their first outpost in the west, Fort Macleod. So if you have ever been to Fort Edmonton, close to the river valley, that's definitely a place that has a lot of history, and talks about how the fort was built here in Edmonton. With time, some of the Blackfoot elders learned to trust these men in red tunics, and an agreement was reached. The train would now be allowed to cross their land. Later, Louis Riel, the leader of the Métis, a people of French and Indian blood, fought the division of his ancestors' land. The Métis wanted their own country, but their dream was not to come true. The workers began building the railway. Soon the first whistle of the Canadian Pacific train blew in the west. The train brought people... A little bit of a hard book for me to hold, but I'm making it work. From eastern Canada, as well as Ukrainians, Poles, which are Polish people, and Germans from Europe. There were houses to build, fields to plow, and a new way of life to learn. The Mounties were there to help the new families settle in. The Mounties' musical ride entertained the people in the new communities. That's something you can Google if you want to learn more about, is the Mounties' musical ride. It's quite impressive. Gold in the Klondike. Thousands of men rushed to the Yukon hoping to strike it rich. Dawson City went mad. Men used bad language, played cards, and spent the night dancing with the ladies. But of course, the law had to be respected. So another thing you might want to Google is the gold rush. That's what that is referring to. The Mounties reached the far north. There they met the Inuit. These people snuggled up in igloos, houses that were made of blocks of ice. It was the Inuit who helped the Mounties explore the Canadian Arctic. So, as you can see, snowshoes here, and they would have used the dogs for dog sleds to get around. King Edward VII recognized the important work the Canadian Mounties were doing, and he gave them a royal title. They became known as the Royal Northwest Mounted Police. Later, their name was changed to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Today, the Mounties don't travel the country on horseback as they did in the time of John A. Macdonald, but their work is just as important. They're dedicated to protecting Canadians by watching over the country's borders from the Atlantic provinces to the Yukon. There we go. Well, thank you for joining me for the read aloud of these two books. So I'm going to give a clap like I do when you come to the library for these very excellent books. So hopefully you enjoyed that. And I miss you. And I hope that everybody is staying safe and healthy. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye.